Russia in Daniel 11, Part 5. In Daniel chapter 11, the 11th verse, the two superpowers of the 3rd century went to war in the region of Raphia in 217 BC. The king of the north, Antiochus the Great, finally suffered defeat at the hands of the king of the south, Ptolemy Philopater, who won a decided victory. And now in verse 12 we are shown the history of events which immediately followed Ptolemy's success. Shortly after Ptolemy's victory, he determined to visit many of the cities and regions now regained, with Jerusalem being one of them. When he arrived at Jerusalem, he was struck with the splendor of the temple and offered sacrifices there. Ptolemy, whose heart was lifted up, gained entrance into the holy place, much like King Uzziah had done years before when his heart was also lifted up. But not content with this, Ptolemy urged his way towards the most holy place. According to the law of the Jews, this was forbidden by everyone except the high priest once a year on the Day of Atonement. But like King Uzziah, Ptolemy would not hear these reasons, even with much of the city in protest. Full of pride over his recent success and not willing to be restrained, he pressed forward, even more determined to enter the most holy place. Suddenly, he was seized with a strange terror and alarm of mind. Then, paralyzed momentarily in his legs, he mysteriously fell down, half dead. Ptolemy Philopater was carried out of the temple in this condition before he could reach his desired destination. As a result, Ptolemy Philopater left Jerusalem, burning with anger against the whole nation of the Jews. And when he arrived back to Egypt in Alexandria, he began a persecution against the Jews which increased over time. One of the first decrees he made was that everyone who would not sacrifice to his god Bacchus could no longer have access to him, expelling all Jews from their offices of dignity. Ptolemy ordered certain Jews to be branded with a hot iron in their faces with the sign of an ivy leaf, the sign of Bacchus. Those that refused to either sacrifice to his god or to come and receive the mark of the ivy leaf were put to death. The oppression against the Jews increased more and more until many 10,000s of God's people were cut down in persecution. History documents one of the decrees in the following words: "As soon therefore as the contents of this letter become known to you, in that same hour we order those Jews who dwell among you with wives and children to be sent to us vilified and abused, in chains of iron, to undergo a death cruel and ignominious, suitable to men disaffected. Whoever shall shield a Jew, whether it be old man, child, or nursing baby, shall with his whole house be tortured to death. Whoever shall inform against the Jews, besides receiving the property of the person charged, shall be presented with 2,000 drachmas from the royal treasury, shall be made free, and shall be crowned. Whatever place shall shelter a Jew shall, when he is hunted forth, be put under the ban of fire and be forever rendered useless to every living being for all time to come." And so it was that after the battle of verse 11, the people of God, who at that time were the Jews, suffered a great crisis and persecution, and sudden destruction came on God's people who lived within Ptolemy's jurisdiction of Egypt. However, as recorded in verse 12, and as we will see in part 6, the southern kingdom was not strengthened by persecuting the apple of God's eye, and from that time onwards, the southern kingdom took a steady decline, never to be reversed. Daniel's reputation for repetition now shines light on current events as we come down to our day. It is important to notice that so far the repeat of history occurs in the same order, verse by verse. we saw that in part 4 that as the two superpowers of the 3rd century in verse 11 warred against each other in the region of Raphia in 217 BC, so the two superpowers of the world today, Russia and America, are warring against each other in the region of Ukraine. And then next in the history of verse 12, we see a persecution by the king of the south, Ptolemy, on God's people. Well then, in the repeat of history, we can expect that in our day, the next major event after the war is the repression and persecution of God's people by the king of the south today within his jurisdiction. However, the repeat of verse 12 is yet future, as the war in Ukraine between the two superpowers, Russia and America, has not yet concluded. But looking back into sacred history, we can see clear examples of the oppression of God's people by a southern power. One of the earliest Bible examples was Egypt. Cruel and severe was this power. Not only were the people of God held under the most oppressive bondage, but they were also subjected to a large-scale massacre of their infant baby boys. But God's prophetic eye not only foretold their persecution, but also their final deliverance at the hand of Moses. France was the next to take position. Just prior to this, France left its cruel mark in the history of St. Bartholomew's massacre. In 1572, a bell tolling at midnight was the signal for the slaughter of the Protestants. The persecution, which began in the city of Paris, spread to all provinces and towns where God's people were found. From the innocent babe to the man of grey hairs, male and female, noble and peasant, all were cut down together. 70,000 of the very flower of the nation perished. In the 18th century, revolutionary France burnt the Bible and put to death many religious professors of the day. Scaffolds ran red with blood from priests. The 7-day week was even changed to 10, trampling on the King of Creation's divine sign of the weekly cycle. Once again, God had foretold the persecution under this southern power, calling it spiritually Egypt. At this time, during the French Revolution, France rose to take the title of King of the South before dealing its deadly blow to the papacy in 1798, as described in Daniel 11, verse 40. And in more recent history, persecution of both Jews and Christians in Russia and its empire, the Soviet Union, is well documented. Even before Russia assumed a more atheistic title like Egypt and France of old, its empire was responsible for religious persecution. From 1881 onwards, in what came to be known as the Russian pogroms, 70,000 to 250,000 civilian Jews were mown down, homes were destroyed, businesses pillaged, and savage mutilations occurred. Those who lived in the cities were more vulnerable as a target. And under the Soviet regime, according to some sources, around 12 to 20 million Christian deaths occurred. Many church buildings were confiscated or destroyed, and other religious leaders were exiled or killed. Much like revolutionary France, in 1929 the Soviet Union also changed the days of the week by implementing a 5-day week instead of 7. Later it became a 6-day week, but eventually returned to a 7-day week after the negative effects left on the people. Now in our day, the book of Daniel reveals that in the not too far distant future, the repression of God's people by Russia, the king of the south today, will be repeated in a striking similarity to the history of Daniel 11 verse 12. Though it may seem to many that these things are all a figure of the past, a wise man once said, "The thing that has been is that which shall be, and there is no new thing under the sun." Friends, at times dark clouds surround God's people. It seems as if oppression and persecution would destroy all faith. But remember, Christ is with us in times of repression just as much as in the sunnier days. His suffering in Gethsemane, where he did sweat great drops of blood, shows us that he has trod the thorny path before us. It is in the darkest night that the stars shine the brightest, and so the most brilliant beams of God's light will shine in the deepest gloom of persecution. Is it your desire to make preparation today for the trouble tomorrow? Russia in Daniel 11, end of part 5.